Hello, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to join us for this session. First of all, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Debbie Summersgill. I work for Care Network and we are commissioned by Public Health and Better Care Fund to provide a safe and warm home service across the borough. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. But part of our role is to develop and raise awareness of the health risks of living in a cold, damp home to residents and for them to be able to keep themselves safe and warm. So the aim of the session today is to give you all a basic understanding of the risks of fuel poverty and damp condensation and mould, which is at the forefront of everybody's minds following the death of the young boy last year in Rochdale. So to help you know how to spot the signs of damp condensation and mould and to know the impacts that is having on people's health and well-being. As a frontline member of staff, you'll all have seen firsthand the homes and the conditions that your customers and patients live in. And that makes you ideally placed to help to identify any problems and point people in the right direction for support. I'm sure many of you will already have an awareness of some of these issues and that this will be a refresher, but for some of you it may be new, and hopefully we'll clarify what the main risks are, what the main red flags are, and give you confidence to provide basic on-the-spot advice or to signpost your customers and patients to services, including our Healthy Home service, which I'll tell you a little bit more about later. It's not going to make you an expert, but hopefully it'll increase your awareness of the issues and what can be done to help. So it could lead to you making the difference to somebody's quality of life. So first of all, fuel poverty. There are three main contributing factors to fuel poverty. There's high fuel costs, there's low income, and there's energy efficient homes. So high fuel costs are a major problem to a lot of us at the moment in time, along with the cost of living crisis on top of that. People who are on a low income, on low wages or on benefits may find it difficult to make ends meet and can find themselves in fuel poverty. And also, if somebody's home isn't particularly energy efficient, so if the condition of the property is not good, if it's not properly insulated, and if they haven't got adequate heating in the property, again, that creates poor energy efficiency. So those three factors together put somebody at quite a high risk of being in fuel poverty. And I'm sure you've all heard the phrase heating or eating. It is a sad reality for lots of people, unfortunately. And it does result in things like poor mental and physical health, people get into fuel debt and wider forms of debt, or people are disconnecting themselves by not using the amount of fuel they need to keep themselves warm and safe because they can't afford it. And as we're going to go on to a little bit later, not heating your properties sufficiently can be a significant contributor to condensation and mould. Okay, so the effects of a cold home. You'll see on the slide here, there are a range of temperatures, which you're perhaps all familiar with. Keeping your home within the 18 to 21 range is advisable, and that poses a minimal risk to health. But as you'll see on the table there, as temperatures start to drop, there are increasing impacts on the risk to people's health and long-term conditions. And people don't have to be in these temperatures for weeks at a time. Sometimes it can be hours or a day too, and it can really start to impact significantly. On the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see some of the wider impacts of living in a cold home. So things like social isolation, and people may be really reluctant to invite friends and family around to the home because it always feels cold and damp, and that can lead to them feeling socially isolated. It could result in poor nutrition and poor mental health. Absences from work due to illness can be a factor, and children's underachievement educationally because they haven't got the right environment to be able to study at home because everybody's crammed into one room to keep warm and there's too many distractions, etc. And then there's the risk of carbon monoxide poisoning for people who don't maintain the heating systems properly. So there are several indications of fuel poverty and that there's a problem. And as frontline professionals who are visiting people at home, then that puts you in a really good position to be able to look out and listen out for some of the things that you may come across. So, for example, people may tell you that they're always cold and that the home's always drafty, or they may complain of regular or persistent illnesses. They may tell you they're struggling to pay the bills. They may even tell you that they stay in bed all day just to keep warm, or they go on the bus all day, or they go to hospital because it's warmer there than being at home. There might be things you can see in the property, so mould stains on the walls, on the curtains, damaged wallpaper and paint and decoration. You may notice that people have blocked up the ventilation points on the windows and the ventilation bricks. You may find that people are wearing far more clothes than what they would normally need to indoors, and that they're just generally in poor health and very tired and perhaps feel a little bit distressed and anxious. You may also see lots of portable gas heaters or other sorts of heating around the property. And then when you're in somebody's home, you may feel cold yourself. You may never take your coat off when you go to see Alice because it's always cold and damp in there. You may notice as you go around somebody's home that there's big differences in temperatures between rooms, and that the customers, you know, if you have cause to touch them, their hands may feel cold, and there may just be a sense of gloom, and everything feel damp and depressed. Okay, so what's the solution to fuel poverty? Well, there's three things we can do to try and minimise somebody being in fuel poverty. And the first off is to improve the energy efficiency of the home. So any energy that and warmth that they're paying for, to keep it within the home. So making sure that homes are adequately insulated, that if they've got heating and the heating has timer and controls, that they're using them to the best effects, so that they are in full control of the systems, and making sure that homes aren't drafty and that letting cold drafts in unnecessarily. We also look to maximise people's income. So people who are on benefits, check that they're receiving the benefits they're entitled to. And if they're not on benefits, again, check whether there is something out there they could be claiming. If people are struggling with debt or budgeting, then again, there's support out there to help with that. And there are grants available through various organisations that can help support with fuel payments, boiler servicing and that sort of thing, which again will help maximise their income. Energy advice is always helpful, so people following energy saving tips, and there's lots of them around at the moment to help sort of shave the edges off the bills that they're paying, and to make sure people are on the right tariff for those circumstances, to again make sure they're not paying over the odds for the fuel that they're using. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit now about different types of dampness. So I'm going to start off with the three types around rising damp, penetrating damp and leaky pipes. So first of all, rising damp. So rising damp is caused by water rising up from the ground and being soaked up through the brickwork and the plaster. And as the image on the screen there is a really good example of what it would look like. Now, this only affects ground floor or basement rooms. If you've seen damp on walls in an upstairs room, then it's not going to be rising damp, because as I say, it only affects downstairs rooms. The solution to it isn't a cheap one or easy one, unfortunately. If people are experiencing rising damp, then the solution is to have a damp proof course. put into the property where they inject chemicals into the walls that prevents that water being drawn up through the brickwork. If they've had a damp proof course and they're still experiencing rising damp, then it could be that the damp proof course has failed and may need to be replaced in certain areas. So the second type is penetrating damp. Now this is normally caused where there is disrepair to the exterior of the house, so things like leaking roofs, blocked gutters, missing pointing, anything that's allowing rainwater to come into the home and cause, as you can see on the image there, areas of dampness indoors, but it is caused by water coming out, in from the outside. Now the solution to this is basically to repair whatever the defect is that's allowing that water to come in. Once that's been repaired, then the internal walls should dry out, and depending on how long and the extent of the damage, it may need plaster to be repaired and replaced inside or redecorated. Okay, so the third type is where there's defective plumbing or leaky pipes. This can happen anywhere around the home, not necessarily on the exterior walls. It can be from pipes under the sink, kitchen sink, under the bath that are leaking. It can be from central heating pipes that have burst or have got damage to them. So the solution here is to identify where the leak is and to repair it, basically. And again, similar to penetrating damp, once the source of the water has been rectified, then the area should dry out, and depending on the extent of the damage, may need some cosmetic work and some decoration done to it. Now the one the one important thing about all these three types of dampness is they very rarely show black mould. Because of the chemicals in the bricks and the cement and the chemicals in the central heating pipes, that prevents mould growth. So if you're seeing black areas of mould growth, then that would point you towards condensation rather than one of these three types. But it is always worth just having a quick look to make sure there are no areas of penetrating damp or defective plumbing. So whose responsibility is it to rectify these three areas? Well, for owner occupiers, obviously they're responsible for carrying out and paying for any repairs to their own property. And we do have at Care Network a Safe Trader scheme. And this is, we have about 70 different tradesmen on our books who have all been quality assured. And residents who are over 50 or who are caring for somebody or have long-term health conditions or disabilities, including mental health issues, can access that scheme and be put in touch with a reputable trader who will give them a free, no obligation quote. And depending on the cost of that quote, it's entirely up to the owner occupiers as to whether they want to go ahead and have that work done, because they would have to pay for what was done. If a resident is a tenant, then the landlord will have responsibilities to maintain their properties to a certain standard, and that includes working heating and hot water systems. Quite often landlords are responsible for repairs to the fabric of the property, bricks and mortar, so to speak, but it can be tenant's responsibility for some aspects of that, so it's always worth the tenant checking their agreement to see whether it's their responsibility. Now, if it is if it is the landlord's responsibility, the housing standards team at the council will support tenants if landlords are not being cooperative and carrying out the repairs that are needed. If the tenant is responsible, then again, if they meet the criteria for the Safe Trader scheme, then they can use that scheme to get some no obligation quotes from reputable builders, but the cost would come down to them. Okay, so the fourth type of dampness, which I've touched on a little bit already, is condensation. So You probably already know condensation is caused when warm air comes into contact with cold surfaces, and the water vapor in the air then condenses into water droplets and lands on the cold surfaces. It normally happens on exterior walls because they're the coldest, and windows and windowsills, but sometimes it can occur on floors and in cupboards and drawers and wardrobes. It usually occurs more during the colder winter months, and it doesn't really matter whether it's rainy or dry outside because it's not really being affected by what's going on outside the property. It's concerned with what's happening inside the property. And the three main causes are excessive moisture. So if there's more moisture in the air, that will make it more likely to cause condensation. If there's inadequate heating or ventilation in the property, again, that will cause condensation. And as I mentioned with the three previous types, where black mold is not normally present, with condensation, black mold is nearly always seen. And you can see from the image there, that is quite a severe case, but you can see the black mold that is growing on the cold walls and ceiling and around the window there. And that can cause health risks. So it can cause an increased risk of respiratory infection. It reduces people's resistance to bacteria and viruses, and it can trigger asthma and skin conditions because of the allergy to the mold spores. Now, what to look out for if you suspect condensation. So as I mentioned on the previous slide, and you can see on the image, black mold is nearly always a symptom of condensation, so that's quite easy to spot. There may be areas of wetness on the wall. You may see the actual droplets on the walls of the surfaces. There may be a bad musty smell around the property, and there may be areas of decoration that have been spoiled, peeling wallpaper, paint coming off. You may notice that clothing and bedding feel damp and cold, and you may see areas of fungal fur, which is a type of mold that grows on fabrics. So in wardrobe, clothes in wardrobes and drawers may start to show evidence of that. So how do we prevent condensation? Well, condensation is often a symptom of lifestyle rather than disrepair. So there's three main areas of advice that we would give to residents who are experiencing condensation and mould. First of all, that would be to reduce the excess moisture. So to minimise the amount of water vapour that's in the air by putting things like putting lids on pans when cooking, drying washing outdoors rather than on radiators or on indoor maidens. Things like running the cold water before the hot water when they're having a bath. It doesn't change the overall temperature of the bath in the end, but it does reduce the amount of steam that's produced, and therefore limiting the amount of moisture that we're putting into the air. Ventilating the property sufficiently is really important. It's really important to let out any, particularly after baths and showers, any excessive moisture that's occurred, and not blocking up the vents. We often see that vents have been blocked up, either on the window, little trickle valves, or the air bricks that are put into properties. Now, those vents have been put there to provide adequate ventilation, but they are drafty, so people do have a tendency or a temptation to block them over, and that's not something we would recommend. Obviously, the ventilation's there for a reason. And also not putting too much in wardrobes and cupboards, because again, to try and prevent the fungal fur, it's important the air can circulate around clothes and things that are in cupboards and wardrobes. And then finally, heating. Try to make sure that properties are heated to a stable temperature. So as I mentioned in an earlier slide, we're looking at around about 18 to 21 degrees is ideal. Now, obviously, in rooms that aren't used as often, they can be to lower temperature, but it is important to keep them heated to a low temperature to avoid that contrast between really warm and really cold areas, because as soon as the warm air hits a really cold area, it's going to form that condensation. And to make sure that people can heat their homes adequately and safely, we always encourage people to have the boilers serviced regularly and the gas fires to make sure that they are safe and working efficiently. Now, with fuel prices as high as they are, and with the general cost of living, convincing people to open the windows and let out that warm air is a bit of a hard sell. It's a big ask. And we're not asking people to open the windows and doors for any long periods of time. Just 5-10 minutes after a shower is enough to let that wet air out. But it's actually a fact that it's cheaper to heat dry, cool air than it is to keep reheating air that's really moist and full of water vapor. So it will actually be cost effective to swap that moist air for cooler, dry air by opening the window for a short period of time. Now, for people who are experiencing the black mould, it is always advisable to try and remove it by wiping it down. It can be used, you can use mild detergents such as washing up liquid or very dilute solutions of bleach will work just to wipe down the areas. And there are special antifungal washes that you can buy as well. But to be fair, bleach or washing up liquid will normally do the trick reasonably well. To try and prevent the mould, again, just getting into the habit of wiping down windowsills and around windows and getting rid of those droplets of water as soon as they appear will help prevent that mould starting to grow. If somebody's cleaned an area and wants to redecorate, then it's always recommendable to use paint with an anti-mould property within it to prevent that regrowth in those areas. So again, on to responsibility. Well, as I mentioned, it is quite often a symptom of lifestyle and how somebody's living within the home that causes a problem of condensation and mould. So for owner-occupiers, obviously, it's their responsibility to look after the homes and to use them in the best way they can to prevent it, as is the case with tenants. So tenants living in properties need to make sure that they're not creating excess moisture, that they are ventilating and heating as best they can. Now, if the landlord isn't providing adequate heating within a property, which makes it impossible to provide that adequate heating to prevent the mould, then obviously that's something that would be their responsibility, along with any other repairs, as I mentioned earlier. Now, if a tenant is having problems and they want some support, the Housing Standards team at Blackburn Council can offer them that support. However, they do want you to make sure before you go down that path that the repairs are the landlord's responsibility and they're not being caused by the tenant. And also that the tenant's given the landlord the opportunity to remedy any problems, so to make sure that they've told the landlord of the problems and given them a reasonable amount of time to take action to put them right. If they're not quite sure how to approach the landlords, then the Housing Standards website has got lots of really useful information on there, and also has a template letter that people can use to put their concerns forward to the landlord. There's also a fuel poverty toolkit, which has been developed by the Council's Home Energy Officer in partnership with Public Health. And again, that is aimed at professionals and has lots of really useful information about areas of fuel poverty and sources of support for residents around the borough. So I strongly suggest, if you've got time, just have a quick look at that. The link is there on the slide, but you will be able to Google it. But it is well worth 10 minutes time just to have a look what's on there, and it is a good point of reference for you. For all residents, Cosy Homes in Lancashire is a partnership of the 15 local authorities across Lancashire, and they work together to offer access to grants and to advice on a range of energy efficiency measures. So things like first-time central heating, insulation measures, sources of heating where there is no gas in the property, so things like air source heat pumps under the Home Upgrade Grant, and Eco4 funding is available for insulation measures. Now, unfortunately, there's no funding under Eco4 in Blackburn with Darwen for boiler replacements, as there has been previously. But as I say, they are a wealth of information about all different types of grants that are available to support people improve the efficiency of the homes. And that brings me on to Healthy Home Service, which is a service I manage and is provided by Care Network. As I mentioned earlier, we're commissioned by Public Health and the Better Care Fund in a response to the fact that someone's home environment has such a massive impact on their health and well-being, and that's why our service is commissioned in the way it is. So I just want to expand a little bit about it. So that we have a universal provision where any resident of the borough can approach us for advice and information, and we will signpost them to the right information for their situation. But we also have a targeted provision, so residents of the borough who meet the criteria that are just bullet pointed there on the slide, they can come to us and we will work a little bit more closely with them. We'll carry out a home visit, we'll do a home safety assessment, and we'll work with them to identify issues and to remedy any issues that they may have. So there's 4 main areas to what we do. There's home safety. So here we're looking at things like slip, trips and fall hazards and things that may cause other accidents around the home. Again, as I said, identifying those hazards and helping them to remove them and minimise that risk. We have a Memory Matters service, which builds on the home safety service, and it's targeted at people who are living with any form of memory loss. And it gives a little bit of extra insight into issues around their cognitive or sensory limitations and how that can impact on their safety around the home. We also have a child safety service, which is for families who are vulnerable, and we invite referrals from 0 to 19 health professionals, and we can support there with a child safety assessment and lots of information and advice about how to keep their children safe at home. And we can also provide some safety equipment in the form of child safety gates for those families. And then finally, there's the energy efficiency aspect to our work, which supports very much what I've talked about already today. So we visit people in their homes, as I said, and we look at several things. So we start off looking at the insulation of the home. Are they keeping within the home any heat and warmth that they are paying for? Are they following the energy saving tips that are relevant to them? So we try to get to know the customers a little bit, get to know how they're living around the property, what their daily routines are, and so that we can target and we can tailor those tips to the ones that are really going to be beneficial to them. If people have heating and hot water controls, again, we make sure that they know how to use them to the best advantage to, again, keep the homes warm, but also to keep the costs down. If they need repairs or replacements, boilers or any other heating appliance, then again, we can help them to access funding via Chill. And we do have a couple of pots of money within Care Network at the moment that will help support with that, but there are criteria attached to that. So again, we would fully investigate with each customer whether or not they can access that funding. We make sure people are on the right tariffs and with the best provider that they can be for their circumstances. And we do spend a lot of time at the moment explaining energy bills to customers and discounts. So things like the fuel cap. People don't always understand how the fuel cap works and how it will actually affect them. So we can explain that to them. We explain to them about tariffs, how to read the meters. We explain about standing charges, because again, people aren't always aware that even if they bring their daily usage down, there is still a daily standing charge, which will apply. And we make sure that they're aware of all the discounts that they're entitled to, the warm homes discount, for example, each year. We always recommend people to consider having a smart meter installed, and for a couple of reasons. It does help people monitor their usage and possibly tailor their usage to what they actually need and not waste fuel on things like standby and other things that could be eating away at their meter without them realising. But also it means that they will always get a fully accurate bill and meter readings, so that they're not going to be faced with huge estimated bills, which can put people into debt and can be quite distressing. With every customer we talk to, we do recommend, if they have a vulnerability, that they apply to their provider to be on the priority service register, because what this means is that if there was to be a fuel short outage or any planned works, that they would get support in the form of emergency heating and cooking facilities, blankets, fresh water supplied by United Utilities, etc. So that hopefully it won't put them at any risk whilst they are disconnected. So as a service, we have over the last 2 or 3 years produced some booklets. You'll see the images there are just the front covers. So we have one around keeping warm and well in winter, one helping people to reduce damp, condensation and mould in the home, and one about avoiding slip, strips and falls. And then we produced a couple of advice sheets last year around preventing damp and condensation, and with a few of the things I've mentioned today on there that people can take away or download and have for their information. So that brings me on to my final slide. So that's our contact details there. We are accessible by phone Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 on option 3. And we have all the information about our Healthy Home service, along with a copy of this presentation that you've just been watching, and a handbook that sits alongside it with all this information and a little bit extra for you to access, again, on our website. And we have a direct email address as well, which you can email us at. If anybody has any questions or would like any more information about damp, mould and condensation, what it is, how to prevent it, how to support your customers and patients, please do get in touch. We're more than happy to speak with you. So all that's left to me to say is thank you so much for taking the time to watch this presentation. I hope you found it really useful. Thank you.